technology. This is really the fruition of our platform vision. Taking the concept of integrations and making them so ubiquitous that they disappear. The thing about startups is that you're probably going to fail, and you just got to get comfortable with that. I basically have to make 5 or 6 key decisions every year with a high hit rate of success. Sometimes you just have to believe even when you don't believe. You got to pick a direction, and you got to go.
All right. Well, it is often hard to get going with the without the roar of the crowd in front of you. But to all the many folks in SaaStr that are watching this live, folks that will, the 100,000 plus that will listen on the podcast and our YouTube, thank you for joining us at SaaStr Scale. I am very excited to have a CEO that I haven't gotten to know yet, but I have really looked up to from afar, which is Todd McKinnon from Okta. So many interesting things about the company to me. At a niche level, the identity space and the login space are always interesting. I mean, goodness, why is it so hard to deal with logins and passwords and identity after all these years? So I've always had a personal interest for a while. And it's also a very interesting space that in some ways might have seemed niche, and today is a $30 billion security and identity leader. So super excited to have you here, Todd. Thank you for joining everyone here at SaaStr.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And yeah, we were first scheduled back in February, and
it was that COVID that hit, that coronavirus that hit.
It was my schedule, Jason. It was my schedule.
Schedule.
I'm so busy. I could, for 7 months.
You are busy. And before we get into it,
I'm excited to be here, and yeah, it's a amazing thing you have going, and I'm honored to be here.
On the busy, actually, I wanna. We have some great, just 2 things. One, for folks, we will save some time at the end for Q&A. So hit that. I know many of you are watching on Twitter or LinkedIn or other social media, but folks on the Zoom, hit Q&A right there at the bottom of the Zoom. And for folks on Twitter, respond to a tweet I put out. I've got one from Alex Wilhelm from TechCrunch and a few others, and we'll try to get to a bunch of your questions at the end. And what we're going to talk about is how to build a high performance organization in 2020. And we've talked about a bunch of great things to prep for this call. But actually, Todd, I know you were joking about your schedule, but in all seriousness, tell us, how do you manage your time as CEO? This is actually one of the toughest topics for building a high performance. How do you manage your 40, 60, 80, 100 hours a week?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing that popped in my mind is that the fact that the travel is obviously greatly reduced now has actually made it harder. There's so much less friction for all the things you could be doing.
Yeah.
I find myself pretty balanced. Like, some people are really overweighted toward one function or one particular area. We did my EA and I did an analysis of where I was spending my time, and it's very, very balanced. It's like a lot of time with each functional area, pretty balanced between internal engineering product things and external and customer things. And there is, I would say, within that balance, there's some seasonality. Like right now we're doing strategic planning. So there's the budgeting, the planning, and the discussions that go around with that. And one bucket I always try to make sure is, customers is always really important, but also recruiting as well. When I used to think, when Octa was smaller, I used to think that recruiting would somehow maybe become less important someday, but I think the opposite, it probably becomes more important.
Yeah, that's the one that catches up with. How much at Okta's scales, $30 billion market cap, how much of your time do you spend with customers now, and maybe how many Zooms, and how much time you spend recruiting?
I think recruiting is, I still interview every person that's above a director level that we hire.
Okay.
So that's at least a few hours a week. And then on customers, it's probably the same amount, probably 3 to 4 hours a week, probably.
Got it. It's good. And does this, and on the customers, is it prospects too? Does the sales team still drag you into deals, or are you relieved of that duty at this scale?
It's more heavily weighted toward customers.
Existing customers.
There tends to be customers where there's a big upsell deal.
Yeah.
It's really, the customers, we have an executive, assignment. So I have 6 customers where I'm the sponsor. So I spend a good amount of time with them, just keeping in touch with them and knowing how they're going, knowing how they're doing.
So you're the CS lead for 6 of the largest customers at Okta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the CSs have a interesting job because they have another person, quote unquote me, who's thinking they're the CS and knows how to do everything on that account.
And are those 6, are they reluctant to pick up the email or the Zoom to contact you, or are they?
It's interesting. One thing we found is that they're kind of hesitant to ask me to help.
Yeah.
Because I'm the CEO and they're like, I'm not going to ask the CEO to help. But so I really had to kind of like say, listen, on this account, I'm the executive sponsor, so I'm not the CSO, or I'm not the CEO, right? So ask me, make sure you ask me. If the person won't respond, if you need help getting to another person, ask me. And they were a little bit shy at first, but now they're getting the hang of it.
Yeah, a niche question, and then let's talk about some of the early days at Okta. But land and expanding accounts is obviously the key for most SaaS companies to scaling, right? And you just touched on that, right? You jump in sales a lot to expand the accounts. In a company like Okta, where you're managing identity, how does that work? How would you just get a piece of Okta? Would it just be a division or a silo? And how does that expansion work?
There's 2 parts of our business. There's identity for employees. So if you're the employees at SaaStr, if they all use if they all use Okta to log into their apps at work, and then if that's employee identity, and customer identity is if the website or your online properties used Okta to log your customers into your content. So those are the 2 divisions of the company. So you can, broadly speaking, you can buy employees and then upgrade to customer, or you can start with customer and then upgrade to employee.
Got it.
Or you can also, there's also different modules internally. Like a common one is for employees, you start with single sign-on and then you add multi-factor authentication. That's a common upgrade path for employees.
Got it. And the employee and the customer, is it the same buyer? Is there real synergy there? I could see that there's almost synergy, right? But the use case in reality is a little bit different.
Yeah, the famous almost synergy.
The almost synergy.
Yeah, so I think the reality is that the customer identity is pretty broadly defined. So I would say that it's a newer market, it's forming, and the way we're attacking it is when the buyer is also IT security.
Yes.
There is definitely parts of the market where it's more marketing or more product centric. And that's where the synergy for us is a little bit, we have to build into that synergy a little bit, but many times it's an IT buyer or a security buyer, and that's when there is one buyer, one common buyer.
Got it. Because engineering your product they're going to do their own analysis, right? Before they decide to deploy it, right? Yeah. All right, so let's go back to some interesting things you and I chatted about. In one of the interesting things that you reminded me of when we talked before this call is, well, I guess it's related. Let's skip to the next slide. Getting the big bet right. So we'll talk on the next slide about building a category. Broadly speaking, at least sort of identity is not a new category. Like Microsoft owned a big piece of this, right? But what was the big bet? And maybe just that the cloud was going to get big, which was, we all underestimated that one, right? Yeah. But what was the big bet that Okta rode to its current $30 billion heights?
Well, when I talk about this one, it's like, it's kind of obvious, but it's one of those obvious principles that is so obvious that sometimes it gets missed, and it bears restating, which is, you can't, if you're going to be successful in a new market, for right now, you couldn't start an online bookstore, right?
Yes.
You have to do something that's novel and something that's directionally correct with where the trends are going that give you an advantage. And that's the easy part. The hard part is that, the reason that things are unknown and the bets are not certain is because no one knows them. So in the early days, the high order bit by far is making sure that you pick the right market, or you pick the right differentiation within that market. It can make you successful more than anything. It can make you fail more than anything. It's not the only determinant of your success, but it's by far the high order bit. And for us, it was it was basically that the identity problem, the multiple logins, the security, the authentication has existed since the first computer. And different generations of technology had different versions of identity. The bet for us was that there's really two parts of it. Kind of one was that it would be a big enough problem in the future to build a large independent company, because the previous generation, a lot of the vendors were niche, or they got picked up by bigger companies and never were independent and surviving the test of time. And then the second thing was that there would be so much cloud in the world, and that there would be a cloud alternative for everything. It would actually make sense to have your security and your login and your identity be in the cloud, which back in 2009 was not obvious. It was.
That's true. That was seen as crazy, right? That's the one. I can't trust my credentials in the cloud, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The cloud is like my salespeople are doing something with it out. They got some content, maybe an HR system, but not my. I mean, I'd never do my infrastructure. I'm a data center person where we have our servers, and I don't know about that cloud stuff.
and then as an outsider, it seemed like Okta, I'm sure it didn't feel that way to you, but it seemed like Okta broke out relatively early. But there were competitors that Okta pulled away from. And it was interesting, but you chatted about how being truly enterprise, staying up, right? Uptime and security were actually more critical than features for you pulling away.
I think the first thing was that the product was so differentiated in terms of most of the products in identity, and meaning that it was a cloud service. You didn't have to install software, and you didn't have to, and especially for this market. I mean, by that time, 2010, a SaaS business application or SaaS email was, people were starting to accept that, and it wasn't that revolutionary. But the people that were dealing with identity technologies, they're installing Microsoft Active Directory, or they're doing Computer Associates identity. The fact that we had a really pre-integrated, out-of-the-box, nice-looking UI that was up and running and connected to their systems in minutes was just shocking, right? So that was really differentiated us from all the legacy identity suites that were dominating the landscape at the time. And then, against the smaller competitors that were maybe a couple years before us or about the same time as we were, we really did, we focused on one things. We just made sure that the service was going to be reliable and scalable.
Yeah.
And then we also spent I remember we spent like 7 or 8 months just engineering the fact that we didn't have to take it down for maintenance, And before, I came from Salesforce, and we had to take the service down for 4 hours every 3 months for maintenance to upgrade it.
Yes.
And that was kind of, the way things were done. But with Okta, it was your front door. You couldn't take it down. So we had to spend like 8 months in a, competitive market where we weren't shipping any features, because we knew that we had to be able to not take it down when we upgraded it.
Well, that is, as founders, forever, but certainly maybe up until 20, 30 million, that's one of the most stressful things, isn't it? Is that effort to refactor or to invest in infrastructure when you're feature poor. It's so stressful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you have to put your fist down as CEO?
I think that I don't remember it as being that controversial internally.
Yeah.
I think just because it was kind of obvious. It's like, okay, all right, guys, like, what are they going to say when we tell them to take the service down for 4 hours? They're going to be like, no. So that one was non-controversial. But I do think a lot of people over, we're talking about how this worked out well for us, but I think a lot of early companies, do too much refactoring and too much perfecting of the architecture. Being successful in the marketplace and getting momentum with customers can make up for a lot of sins and give you a lot of time and effort and flexibility to refactor. I mean, all the amazing big companies like Facebook and Google, and these companies all refactored like 3 times.
They do, but I wonder, and you were pretty senior in engineering at Salesforce, right? I mean, you were VP level. You were one of the leaders.
No, I was running engineering. Yeah.
All of engineering. Yeah, I should have.
Yeah.
I mean, refactoring. To me, it's harder in SaaS and cloud a lot of times, right? In B2C, it's complicated, but it's more modularized. You can take pieces out. I go on LinkedIn every day, and my post feed breaks for an hour or two, but no one really knows. Okta can't ever go down, can it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
No,
so meta.
I'm
It
not
can't ever
saying,
go
I'm not
down.
saying you can, once you make it, you can refactor it and bring it
Yeah.
all down. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, you get some more breathing room to do it behind the scenes. Yeah.
No, you do. I guess the question I'd ask for advice for founders, even for me, because I still find the topic stressful and cathartic, is how much, on the one hand, you had to take these 8 months out, right, to make up for your
Yeah.
technical debt. And we all have technical debt, right? On the other hand, you were going very enterprise in many ways, right? You were doing that so you could be the enterprise winner and own reliability, right? And so how much of a hack can we live with? How long can we be, because you probably have had the opportunity to think about this more than anyone. How much, on a scale of 1 to 10 of the hacky scale, how much was Okta hack before you spent 8 months building that reliability?
I can't say Okta and hack in the same sentence.
No,
My
it's too
legal
scary.
people. I'm just kidding. We still have debt today, right? So I don't mean to, imply that we have, we've
No debt.
perfected this by any degree, but I think it really matters. I think you have to be honest with yourself about when you do take out time from delivering directly visible customer features to work on refactoring or architecture. You have to make sure that it's not like it's going to have real benefit, right? Like, it's like the benefit of not taking it down for maintenance. We could say it in one sentence clearly, right? The benefit of going to the new JavaScript framework because it's the cool new thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that may be dubious. So I would just say, just have a real honest conversation about what the benefits are.
Yep. And so how early was that? Was that in year 2, or when did you do that 8-month project to have no downtime?
Year 1. Yeah.
Year one.
Yeah.
Year 1. Got it. So that's interesting. And so you mentioned before, I forget all the timing. You didn't feel like you were super early to the space. You felt like you were relatively early, but that would let you jump ahead in terms of the enterprise to making that enterprise bet.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. I think that we did a better job on reliability and the robustness against some of the competitors that were starting in the cloud and at our same size and stage. And then the other thing that helped us was, and I think it's probably, go to market there's lots of theories about the best way to go to, best go to market strategies and so forth. The one thing I've learned is that it's dangerous to generalize, and it's very market specific. I mean, there's good principles that apply on different kinds of go-to-market, but the right go-to-market for you is it's pretty market dependent. And for us, the fact that we're doing this security in the cloud, this thing that was highly, at least in the early days, was going to be very reference based. The selling, the people that trusted other people that used it. So we really went hard in on direct sales. And we raised a lot of money, and we hired salespeople. The first 50 customers, the first 100 customers, I probably at some level personally sold a lot of them, right?
Got it.
Trust me, I could build this. It's going to work. You're not going to look foolish when you're the only one doing this, and that helped us get it going.
Got it. So definitely the classic enterprise playbook, right? Bring in the CEO, leverage his background, right? Sell high and sell on trust, right? We will deliver this for you, right? Did you have and then I wanted because you talked about trends that you bet on, and let's talk about cloud versus mobile versus developer, because that was a fun conversation. But when we talk about those early days, how, for the long tail, how many apps did Okta have to have on the login side? Like, even back then, the average enterprise probably had 100 apps, including some that you barely touch, right?
Yeah, I remember the first when we got. I think we did something smart as well, which is we talked to customers very, very early. It was customer development from the very early days, and we got the product out there and sold and being used very early. I remember the first customer we had there were 2 apps. There was Salesforce and Google.
Still around today.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we had instead of 2 logins, you had 1 login to 2. It was great. But it was, in the strategy for figuring out which, we built a nice extensible platform so we could connect to other applications easily. But the strategy was basically the first 10 customers, we asked them, what did they have? And we integrated those, and then we kept going, and pretty soon we got the kind of the fat into the distribution where it was the common ones. And then for a long time it took a while to start to work down the long tail. But that's when the benefit of this became really clear, when you could go into a company and you could cover 90% of the apps they have, right?
Got it.
And so I would say that the fat part of the tail, the very common apps everyone has, got us started. But I would say within a couple of years, we built out our catalog so that you get enough down the long tail with some customization tools to get to everything, that you could deliver the value proposition of like, hey, we can cover everything, because customers do want everything covered. They don't want.
They do. And how in the early days when you came in, you had Salesforce and Google, those make sense, right? But when someone had a Microsoft Dynamics instance or an SAP instance, or instead of Workday, they had another application, how did you handle that when you were meeting with a big account? Did you just quietly go off and build it and wave your hands, or did you convince them to have 80% of their apps in the federation, or how'd you handle that scenario? Because it happens to a lot of us.
Yeah, the other thing especially in the early days, there would be a use case, right? We for example, we got really good at delivering the value proposition of, hey, you're going to use Box. We'll connect Box to your on-premise directory. So it won't even be multiple apps. It'll just be, you can use your Windows network password to log into Box, which is much easier for the users. It's like coming at a slice of it. And then maybe they would add, hey, you're also using these other, the email app and Salesforce automation, so you can add those, and it would extend over time. But I think that the other key thing here too is that some of the vendors in the space were very protocol specific. They're like, oh yeah, everyone's going to work on our protocol, and then someone's going to do the work to connect to us. We weren't like that. We were like, we're going to do the work. What do you have? Okay, 10, we can do that. Make it work. And then what happened over time is that we got enough customers that then people would come to us and use our APIs to integrate to our platform.
Yes.
So I think the lesson there is, like, I think Paul Graham talks about, like, doing things that aren't scalable. Don't try to make it too perfect in the beginning. You got to do things that aren't scalable, like just scrappy and get it done, and then let the momentum build around you.
But so you had the API, but you did more of that unscalable work for longer. You built more of the integrations yourself, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of us hope that this API we build in year one, that developers will go on to it, and it's great, but it's a good lesson. You may have to carry that a lot longer than you think, right?
Yeah, and I think there's another lesson about, it's in the slides, is about listening to the customer. And you have to it's a delicate balance between literally doing what the customer says and then combining that with your own vision of what's right for the company. But I think a lot of times companies make the mistake of not listening to the customer enough. And our customers were telling us they want a bunch of apps, they don't want protocols. We listened.
And I want to come to that customer point, but let's hit one thing, because it was so interesting in the earliest days about which bets you have to get right? And so that we talked about sort of 3 bets that Okta is still working on today. There's cloud, which ended up being an A+, with an important note that going enterprise was the winning strategy here, right? Was going in. It's not in every category, but it really worked. There was mobile that you felt you were late to, but survived, right? And then there's developer, which you took a while to sort of invest as heavily as you did in cloud. So what did you learn about where to place your bets?
I think the big thing is that, I guess it can be comforting or it can be disconcerting depending on how you look at it, which is if you don't get one A+, if you don't get one big bet right, you're probably going to struggle. So that could be comforting because you'll have to get one right, or it could be stressful because you're not sure. So, and then beyond that, I think you don't have to get everything perfect, right? These companies that are successful aren't, you're not like 19 for 19 on all the bets. So I think for us, as you said, we started in 2009 and kind of started going to market, and right after the iPad and the iPhone were really, really rampant. And our story on mobile wasn't good for a number of years, right? And we had to try a couple times, and we had architectural changes we made to make it work, and we did a foray into managing mobile devices, which didn't work out. So It turns out that what people really want on mobile is, it's not, it's kind of simple in retrospect, but they just want, login and security to work natively and seamlessly. And I think we were a little late, and then we kind of tried to go too broad on it and try to do too much with the device instead of sticking to our core and making it just amazing on that platform.
Got it. And then the developer one, but it didn't kill you, right? You had the brand, you had the winner, and so you can't be an A+ in everything. Customers are willing to work with you until mobile caught up with the cloud part of the portfolio.
Yeah, it's not other companies too, right? Like, Facebook was, they had a foray on mobile that wasn't great, and in there, if you look at their S1, it was, mobile was like a risk factor. And that,
It is.
3 or 4 years later, it was, mobile, it could like disrupt their web business. And 4 or 5 years later, it was like all the revenue almost.
I'm still waiting for the Instagram to really work on my iPad. I mean, if you have any connections over there, let them know. It's true. And then developer was interesting because developer, in some ways, is a different sale, as we talked about before, right? So you were so enterprise and so IT focused that maybe developers were not as big a focus in the early days.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the 2 parts of our business. We have employee identity and customer identity. The customer identity for us really came out of, talk about listening to the customers. The customers kept wanting to use Okta. We'd sell it to them for their employees, and they would want to use it for their customers or people outside of their employee base, partners, or common thing was like insurance brokers, you would think of like external people, not employees. Yeah. And they would be using the application for this. I remember we had a big pharma company that wanted to use it for, hundreds of thousands of doctors to log in and get prescription information. And we're like, listening to this for a while. We're like, oh, do you really want to do that? And we finally realized that it was going to be a big part of our business. And I think the mistake is that, to your point, we didn't shift early enough to knowing that this, some of the buyers in this new market were going to be overlapping, but there were new influencers and new buyers, whether it was the product person, whether it was the developers that were thinking about building out these new solutions that were going to be customer facing, and getting our product A+ to work perfectly for the developer was something, if I had to do the last 10 years over again, I would have done much sooner.
Yeah. Was it as simple as putting a small team on it earlier, or what would have been the best accelerant there?
Ironically, I think that it's the opposite of that. It's it's much deeper than just having APIs or just having a good website. It's because the thing about developers is they're smart, and once they get past the website and the API, they realize the core of the architecture, how it's built.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons why it if it was just the team or a website, maybe it wouldn't be that much of a problem because you could do it quickly, but it takes a long time, which is why being late, slows you down.
And just one small nerdy question. I know I'm talking to a great engineer, but when you had to add the customer piece, a lot of orgs, it's very complicated to re-architect, like Slack and others, when you hadn't planned to have a multi-org application, right? When everything is supposed to be inside of one company, it's often complicated to share data across companies. Was that a huge project, or was that not? It could almost kill some companies.
I think we had an advantage where, we got fortunate on some of the internal architectures. So a customer could pretty easily have separate instances of Okta.
Got it.
And that helped us a lot, because it is different, as much as the benefit of having one platform that does both in terms of like knowing how to administer it, that's going to scale and so forth. They do want it segmented, so it was pretty easy for us to split that apart on our backend.
Cool. And let's take a couple minutes. You had your lesson was on creating a category, but you had a very interesting version of that in terms of the issues, and which is that the customers got Okta, like identity, security, login. These were issues since the mainframe, probably. I've never used a mainframe, sure, yeah. but for sure, right? Since logging into computers in college, so yeah, the customers got it.
Punch card. That's a.
What's that? Yes, it's a punch card. You just slide that one in. I actually had a summer job where I had to type punch card data into a database manually. There was no way to do it, but yeah, that was. Yeah,
my age is that I ever used punch cards for was a scrap paper in second grade.
Scrap paper. There's a little bit of they were cool though. So your customers got it, but this is a problem that some of us struggle with. Although it's the opposite when we think about creating category communication, which is getting employees and investors excited. Today, it's easy. Today, literally, you can show someone a computer and have them use Okta to log in, and like, okay, I want to work there. I get it, right? This is a safe way for me to log in. But in the early days, it's like, this is too small. This isn't. How do I compete with Facebook? So, talk a little bit about how you convinced employees and investors to join this niche, unexciting space in the beginning.
Oh man, I still get pissed off when you say that. Like, just there's that reaction from those days.
It does. It drives you crazy. You have a
niche.
visceral reaction. It's not true, right?
Thing.
It's huge. It's going to be worth billions, guys. Trust me, it'll be worth billions.
Yeah. It's the customers knew, right? Like you would go to a customer and it was never. The customer's like, oh my God, yes, please solve this. Can you solve it? This would be awesome. This is going to be the best company ever. But at the time there was, local was really hot and mobile was really hot. And there were all these companies that.
Yeah, local. I forgot when that was hot. Yeah, that was hot.
Yeah, we're taking off. And so for investors and, luckily we did get great investors, but a lot of the investors we talked to were, there's never been an independent identity company. The best case outcome here is it'll get bought by CA for, small amount of money, and it's not a big enough problem. And employees couldn't get excited. And the learning for me was that if you stick with your vision and you power through that, it feels really bad in the moment, but it's good because once it flips and once you prove that it is big enough, you by de facto own the category, right? Yeah. You're the person now. And now all of a sudden you go from this person that was kind of pushing the rock up the hill to being this person or this company that is really setting the agenda, which, as painful as going through the process is, you almost want to seek that out, because that means that if you get through it, you have this really powerful position of defining a category and saying, obviously, since there never was a company before that did this at scale, and now we're doing this at scale, by definition, you should listen to us on what's going to happen next, and you should buy our products, and you should come work for us. And the contrast between the two states was pretty poignant in my mind.
And defining category turns out to be a moat if you execute it perfectly, right?
Sure.
It's like a super brand. Not only do you have a brand in the space, but you own that space, so it's a double moat, right? You get
And the ironic thing is that when you're going through the tough parts of that process, the natural reaction is to try to, if that's a word, undifferentiate yourself by shifting into something else that someone else owns.
CRM.
Oh, we're really, yeah, exactly. We're not identity, we're collaboration. A lot of people know about that. So, and that kind of kills the benefit of it.
And when I know I find there's specific moments in terms of ARR, but you may forget, but when did you feel it as a founder, as a CEO? When did you feel that line had been crossed where you had that moat, you were that category leader? Because we all wait, it always seems to take too long. Yeah,
for sure. I think we were probably like 50-ish ARR.
50, so that's pretty late in some ways.
40,
right? 50,
maybe a little later, maybe 30. And at the same time, what really happened was Microsoft announced a competitive product.
I guess then.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, it scared the shit out of me, right? But once I calmed down, I was like, wait a minute. First of all, they're telling everyone in the world to move to the cloud with Office 365, so that's got to be good. And we were seeing that in the customer base. There was like tons of demand because email's in the cloud now. Of course, we need identity. And then the second thing was that, this companies want to see a choice. They don't want to they want to look on a sheet and see like, hey, there's two choices here. Which one am I going to pick? So it validated the category to that degree as well. But the years after that were a lot different, a lot, bigger, faster, stronger.
Yeah. Just one niche question, because it happens to us when you opened up your Google and saw that Microsoft was competing. How long does it take you to get over it? A day, a week? How do you communicate that to the company, other than that it doesn't matter? Like, how long does it take you to realize they usually can't kill you, right? 95 times out of 100.
I think it really takes a year, like a year in the market to convince yourself that it's not going to happen. but I think that intellectually you can get there pretty quickly. And even psychologically, I think you can tell yourself the odds are pretty low. But I think it took, a year of us seeing the behavior in the market and how the customers reacted to really know that it was going to be an advantage.
And you obviously saw some of this on the other side at Salesforce. How can you tell? I've learned certain tells, but how can you tell if someone like Microsoft, whether it's a high enough priority, like are they going to go the distance? Like it's one thing to launch a product, because if you're Microsoft, you have 100 great engineers just extra, right? But will you go years 2, 3, and 4 without revenue, right? Will you build Chatter into a Slack competitor? Are there tells that you saw that maybe it wouldn't be their top priority?
There are, yeah. I think they're different for different companies. Like Salesforce launched a competing product too.
Yes. Was that as scary? Was that scary too, having worked there, or was it less scary?
That it was less scary just because they didn't have control of email. And email is a really strong, a really important app for employee identity. And this was when the company was 100% employee identity. Now it's about 25% customer identity. So anyways, so Salesforce was less scary just because of that. But I remember that they when they announced it, it was not even part of Dreamforce. They leaked it before Dreamforce, like as a pre-leak. And once they did that, I knew they weren't serious about it.
I might have guessed it was the opposite. It's like we're gonna promote it twice. We're gonna leak it, right, and then we're gonna promote it.
No, and then it didn't show up at Dreamforce.
Oh, it didn't show. Then you knew, right? You knew, right?
Yeah. And with Microsoft, the tell was when what the features they were delivering were, you could tell that they weren't doing things for identity. They were doing things for Office 365. So they were doing things to make it too
focused on them as their own vendor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They weren't, you can tell they weren't going after the customer requirement. They're going after which I understand why Microsoft would do this too. They're making sure that the $20 billion communication collaboration business thrived. And that was, I think, a good sign for us.
Well, that's where you can almost always win, right? If the big guy is focused on a single cloud or a single app, and you're going multi-cloud, multi-app, it's impossible. They're never going to have the investment, the Salesforce or Microsoft, at someone that's going to serve hundreds of vendors, right? They'll never have it, will they?
Yeah, it's just it looks on the surface. A lot of people, especially in technology, people look at products and they overfit different products to being the same, right? So they'll look at our identity and Microsoft's identity and they'll say, oh, they're both identity. It's the same. They're competing. But the reality is that it's when you really get into the details, an independent identity product that's going to connect you to multiple clouds and multiple systems is pretty different than what they have, which is pretty coupled to their environment.
And I don't know if this happens at Okta, but it happens with a lot of other vendors with similar dynamics. Do Microsoft and Salesforce generate leads for you when they buy the internal product and they realize, hey, I need more. Like I need more than just something tied to Microsoft or Salesforce, and then they reach out to the sales team wanting to do more?
It happens a lot, and it's not just when they. It's. I would say it's when they just buy Salesforce or buy Microsoft, right? And then it's also when they look at that product. It happens with Amazon a lot too. Like Amazon has some developer tools that, Amazon tends to they're doing a lot of things, but nothing super deep. They're successful a lot with the services that are broad and don't have to be super deep. But the ones they have that are more not as deep, it tend to get customers excited about them, and then they need a real alternative once they get rolling.
Yeah, people fear when the big company launches something that either isn't as enterprise or as niche-y, that often can be an incredible source of leads for you, right? It's not just evangelism or making the market, it's that they just don't do enough, right? And they outgrow that vendor. And so it can be a gift.
Yeah.
It just might take a year to figure it out.
Yeah. It's I'm being real, Jason. It wasn't like overnight. I was confident.
No, I know. And it's funny. Actually, the part that hurts me a little bit is that you felt that way at 30 or 40 or 50 million in revenue, not 5 million or 10 million. I like to think that that's unkillable. Maybe you think it was looking back, but at the time it didn't feel like. If you still felt like a startup, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that's true. It is interesting that the whole point about the early psychology and like how it impacts how you go about things. Yeah. This idea that, I heard this over and over and over. It's not big enough. It's not substantial enough. It's not gonna be a big market. And even to like 2 or 3 years ago, I would explain the company to investors in this pretty like, broad and platform way. And it's this big thing. And they would look at me and they'd be like, wait a minute, it's like single sign-on, right? You get one password for everything. Why don't you just say that? That's awesome. I would love that. And a lot of it is just because I have the scars from when I had to really make it this big thing, when people needed to believe in and evangelize
Yeah, it turned
it
out
that
the
way.
cloud got plenty big enough, right, to solve a lot of these issues anyway, didn't it?
Yeah, that's a good bet.
And then one last one on this piece, and then I want to make sure we have a few minutes to talk about the other points, but it was a funny story about competition. You were worried about competing with Salesforce. There was sort of, you didn't even hire a single person for 4 years to try and maintain the relationship, but it didn't make a difference, did it?
Yeah, I was running engineering there, and so it was pretty sensitive.
You knew the good ones.
Yeah. And I didn't want to piss off Salesforce because I figured that they would, it would be a good partner. They would help sell our product or, it turns out that like a lot of companies, Salesforce is kind of more into selling their own product than your product. So it did end up being it did not end up being, that helpful to have that relationship. But like a lot of things, you got to kind of do it on your own, and no one else is going to help you do it.
Yeah. So 2 things I want to make sure we hit before we run out of time, and just to take 2 questions. I know we've gone long, but there was one great thing that came up when we chatted yesterday. You had a tweet the other day talking about the latest Gartner release in your space, and saying we're a market leader, we're the number 1 in the space, but we want to do even better, right? We want to be even higher in that Magic Quadrant. And it was so transparent, and I thought it was inspirational, right? It was very direct. And what was the messaging there? What were you trying to say? And what were you trying to communicate to employees and to customers with that message?
I think it's really important, especially for employees, that we at Okta, we try to treat employees like owners and builders. And part of that is being straightforward with them.
Yes.
One of the things about being, like everyone in the audience knows, that it is, building a company or starting a company, as the founder or early employees, they know that they get all the information, for better or for worse. And it's like that feeling of it's really empowering to people. It's like, I know what's going on. In fact, with Okta, we did this in the early days, and and we continue to do this today. But in the early days, it was like, I didn't know how to figure out all the problems. I needed help. So the team, sharing it with the team, rallied the team and helped us, survive basically in the early days. So I think the Magic Quadrant, we got the new Magic, which is Magic Quadrant, is in our environment with enterprise buyers, is pretty important. And last year we were like, way up in the leader position, and this year we kind of came down a little bit, and the other competitors got around us and caught us a little bit in the quadrant. And it was, everyone's bummed out when that happens, right?
Everyone.
And then
Yeah.
Everyone's natural reaction is like, oh, we gotta, like, how are we gonna spin this? How are we gonna say that maybe we blame Gartner, we say they didn't do the good job, or like, oh, it's the competitor, Microsoft paid them a lot of money. It's all this crazy ideas that aren't true at all. And so I felt like the best thing to do would just be tell the employees that, hey, I'm disappointed, and here's what the feedback was. And by the way, we need to listen to feedback. We have a lot of things we could do better across the board, and this is a good source of feedback. We might not like it, but let's take the feedback and get stronger. And I think it, and the last thing is, I saw that, the tendency, not just to rationalize it internally, but the tendency to kind of like maybe brush it over and not address it, which I also think is, I don't know, just not genuine. And it doesn't give the feeling to people like they're that builder and that owner, or even customers or prospects. Like, they want to know they're dealing with a company that is forthright and transparent and honest, and they can trust with their security. So it's an important part of our brand. Yeah, well, certainly it's an important part of your brand, right? I love the thing that you said, which is 99 times out of 100, truth's your friend, right? Yeah. People are, most people are good people doing the right thing, and sometimes they complicate the communication part of it. And if they can just be honest and open, and they're, people are gonna, the truth resonates, and people, it's especially now where there's so much transparency online, and buyers are discovering things and watching, talking to their peers and so forth. The more transparent and truthful you are, the more trustworthy you can be perceived, the stronger your brand is going to be. Yeah, I love it. And then your follow-up was, don't worry, because we worry about this as founders, especially when we're small, is don't worry about drawing attention to something, right? Just handle it head on, and it's okay. Your customers get it, right? Your employees get it. And don't worry that bringing it up
talking to your customers, talking on Twitter is going to bring too much attention to a question.
Yeah, like, I mean, if it's a relevant question and if it's a relevant issue,
yeah,
the people that it matters to are going to know about it. Like for us, the people that look at the Magic Quadrant have already looked at it. They're not going to go look at it and see our position went down a little bit because I tweet about it.
All right, well, why don't we, there's more stuff I'd love to get into, but why don't we wrap this up with just
I think we got through one slide, Jason.
I know. Well, we got through a lot of the good points, but I want to use a question from Alex Wilhelm from TechCrunch, just kind of a cue of where we are in this crazy COVID cloud acceleration cycle, right? His niche question, which is a good one, which is how are different market segments, SMBs, mid-market enterprise, recovering in different geos? Like, what are you seeing across your customer base? We'd love to hear that as a leader, right? But also, where are we? Are we going to go back to some sort of normal? Have we pulled the future forward 5 years? But are we going back? Like, where's the cloud going to be in 2021 and 2022?
I think there's two parts of that answer.
Yeah.
The first part is just about inertia and habits. I think the basic technologies for collaboration and communication are here.
Yep.
And they have been for several years. And I think the change there is just inertia and habits. The fact that if a customer, if there's a prospect or an important customer, for a long time I had to be there in person because it was just showing deference to them. Right. And now I think a lot of us have proven that we don't have to be there in person to show that deference and build that relationship. And so that's just a habit, right? It's not a technology thing.
You think that'll stick? You think you can close a 7-figure deal after COVID without getting on a jet?
Depends on if the competitor does. No, I think it's that.
Well, that is a good insight, isn't it? Right. That's the thing, right? When they get back on jets, it's a worry.
Yeah, I think that when you're showing deference, like when it's doing something that a competitor will or won't, might be more complicated. But the point about habits and inertia, like for example, I think telemedicine that's a habit thing. I'm getting physical therapy online. It's like that's going to stay. It's just so much better. It's just so easier. So that's habits. And then I think the other thing is we'll call it digital transformation, call it getting online, call it like trying to compete with Amazon on every business. The urgency for that now is really coming to a head. But doing those companies building out those products and services, it's a much longer lead time and tail than just getting on Zoom for things. So you're gonna see that play out over the next couple of years, where I think the acceleration of companies that transform digitally, get online, get better customer experiences online, are really going to accelerate ahead over the next few years. And those that don't, those companies falling behind is going to be accelerated a lot, just because just so much of everything has been pushed online. You see all the charts with Amazon, e-commerce, Shopify.
E-commerce is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
but it's even more than
years.
that. It's like it's supply chains and people that have had to figure out how to ship and produce meat, and how they do that better with technology because they couldn't be in the distribution centers and so forth. It's all that digitalization of the economy it's just the need for it and the potential for it has been, everyone really, really sees it in a tangible way. So you're going to see winners and losers sorted out much more quickly in the next 3 years than you would have otherwise, I believe.
All right, just two more and then we'll wrap it up because this is so great. One was just a super specific question on your interviewing process, but it's still a good one. When you do interview directors and above now, or VPs and above, where do you drop in? At the end, in the middle? And do you veto today, or do you just provide counsel during those interviews?
So it's at the end. And the purpose of it is it's really not it's not a veto thing. It's really I want to kind of talk about the culture, and I want to build a relationship with the person so that I feel like I have more of that connection, and I can be a more effective leader for those leaders. And that's the purpose of it. It has a good impact on the people too. It as they should feel. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel like the CEO cares. And I've probably done, I don't know how many of them, I've probably done in the last 5 years, I've probably done, 500 of them.
Yeah.
I did veto one person.
Well, 1 out of 500. Yeah, it's like 50 times more impactful if it's before they start than if it's right after they start, isn't it? It's its own point, but it's so much more impactful.
Yeah, and you know, for me too, it's you learn interesting things. You talk about their companies. You learn a lot about what's going on with other companies and markets and stuff. It's interesting.
All right, this last one. The last lesson 6 you had. Take more photos. You have to have been a founder and gone at least 5 years, I think, to get this one. And like a little tear to my eye came when I saw this. So, what does take more photos? I know what it means, but what does take more photos mean?
Well, it's you know, the hard thing about what we were doing, you were doing, and what a lot of people in the audience are doing is that, but the definition of it is that you don't know if you're going to succeed, because if you knew if you're going to succeed, it would, you would be not making the right big bet. You would be not creating the category. You'd by definition not be doing what we're all trying to do. So then in that uncertainty and in that, you know, apprehension,
Yeah,
you're like, why do I need to take a photo of this? This might not all work. I mean, it's not going to be something we celebrate about. But I think take more photos is kind of like, you know, you have a chance, and it's going to be amazing. And you know, it's almost like it's like a, you know, the sun will come out, right? It's, you know, it could work out. Make sure you take photos, because you're going to look back at this and love these early days when you weren't sure it was going to work out, but it turns out it will.
Yeah, and celebrate all the mini victories, right? It's as CEO, I know it's back to work the next day, but you've got to celebrate them, don't you? We almost all under celebrate the mini wins, don't we?
Yeah. It's especially when you're when you know the next battle's coming. So
it's always coming. All right, Todd. Well, this was incredible. This was a terrific session, A+. Did we hit everything? Anything else you wanted to hit today? I think we hit all of it. Did we do okay?
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah. I really enjoyed being here, and yeah, we'll have to do it again. We'll have to get to slide 2 next time.
We'll get to slide 2. Maybe when we get on the vaccines are just going out now. So when we're on the other side of this, we'll do it live on stage in front of 10,000.
Yeah.
All right, man. This was great. Thank you for all your time. Talk with you soon.